I want to play.
George was playing with toy cars when suddenly one took off, leaving smoky black trails behind it. Headlights blazed bright red. George ran, but his car pursued him. It cut off his path to the door. Distorted children's screams echoed from it. Peppa entered George's room and grabbed one of his cars. The vibration shook her hands fiercely. She threw it against the wall. It shattered into pieces. Black smoke burst out from debris. Tendrils flickered briefly, then retracted back into fragments. The car instantly reassembled itself into one whole piece again. It rolled out into the corridor toward stairs. George followed, his eyes glazed over, staggering. Peppa caught him, but he broke free with a growl.
I want to play.
His voice was hoarse now. She saw a mannequin standing in doorway, motionless, and then that car burst free from his chest and sped toward George himself. George picked up his car. It stuck to his hand as if magnetized. Crimson light enveloped him, his body deformed. Skin grayed, joints twisted unnaturally. Eyes became tiny red points. He turned to Peppa, the new small mannequin now, with his hand still clutching pulsating car glowing red. George emitted an distorted scream again. In horror, Peppa ran to playground equipment, stopping at swings as figures began crowding around her. Dozens of small mannequins with hearts glowing red inside their toy bodies. Tentacles moved on their arms. Mannequin George stepped forward, reaching out, tentacle toward his sister. Peppa backed away, her back pressed against cold porcelain body of another mannequin. The reflection in her eyes showed monsters circling around her and a burning red dot igniting in her own. Peppa walked into the store. Miss Rabbit was standing by a vending machine fixing something. Pay attention to the mirror on the wall. In its reflection, a different Miss Rabbit. Black eyes, a mouth stretched ear to ear, black liquid dripping from the corners. Peppa said anxiously,
Miss Rabbit, something's not right.
Miss Rabbit approached the mirror. In her reflection, the same terrifying smile. Her face briefly aligned with the reflection. Black eyes, a wide grin.
Trick of the light, haha.
She said casually. Peppa noticed a mirrored jewelry box on the counter. It was empty inside, the bottom made of mirror. But in the mirror of the box, not Peppa's reflection, but writhing black tendrils reaching downward. It wasn't a window, it was a door. Peppa dropped the box and shattered it. Black liquid seeped from the shards, and thin tendrils crawled out of it. They slowly reached for Peppa's legs. Panicked, Peppa ran deeper into the store and leapt into a dark back room, slamming the door shut. On the back wall, a large antique mirror covered with a dusty cloth. The cloth twitched as if someone were breathing behind it. Suddenly, it flew off by itself. In the mirror, not Peppa, but a distorted version of her. Black eyes, a wide, unnatural smile. Tendrils burst from the mirror, gripping the frame. The reflected Peppa reached a hand through the mirror. Her fingers dripped with black liquid. The real Peppa slowly walked forward, eyes wide. She wasn't moving on her own. There was the sound of glass cracking, distorted Peppa laughter, the rustle of tendrils. Peppa stepped out of the back room. She was smiling, but her eyes flashed red for a split second. A black drop slid from the corner of her mouth, a shard of mirror on the floor. In it, the same horrifying reflection of Peppa flickering. Peppa was standing by the gate. Suddenly, she heard a whisper with echoes of many voices. Peppa entered the garden. She approached the central apple tree. Its roots protruded from the ground. The branches of the tree suddenly jerked. They formed a huge gaping mouth in the trunk from which a growing whisper escaped. The leaves on the apple tree instantly turned black. They fell off, turning into black dust. Bare branches curled like bony fingers. They reached out to Peppa. She jumped back, looked around, and saw Grandma Pig walking straight toward the tree. Grandma Pig stopped in front of the mouth tree. A frozen smile was on her face. Her lips moved silently. Black tentacles, resembling roots, burst out of the ground and wrapped around Grandma's legs. They crawled higher, up to her waist. Slime left dark stains on her dress. Grandpa Pig stepped outside. He shouted and rushed toward Grandma. He grabbed her by the shoulders, trying to pull her away. New tentacles shot out from the tree's mouth. They wrapped wrapped around Grandpa's arms, neck, and torso. His eyes glazed over with horror. The mouth of the tree opened wider. The tentacles began pulling Grandma and Grandpa toward the trunk. Peppa tore herself away and ran through the garden toward the house. She slammed the door shut behind her and leaned against it, heart pounding wildly. The hallway was dark. Curtains on the windows were drawn tightly shut. Silence. Grandma was sitting on the sofa looking at Peppa. Her skin was gray and cracked like bark. Instead of hands, dry, gnarled branches. A faint whisper emanated from her mouth, part of the choir. Peppa ran to the kitchen. Grandpa was there, his body covered with black veins like roots. His eyes were glazed over and lifeless. Grandpa stepped forward. His root legs creaked on the floor. From a dark corner of the room came a screeching sound. Monstrous roots slowly emerged from a crack in the floor. A dense ball of black, shiny roots as thick as a hand. In its center glowed two dim red points like eyes. Peppa pressed herself against the locked front door as twisted figures of Grandma and Grandpa moved closer in front of her. The light inside flickered out. Only glowing red eyes of monster roots remained. The last thing Peppa heard were merging whispers of the choir, the voices of loved ones sounding louder than all others. Peppa and her family decided to go on a trip. They were sitting in the waiting hall. Suddenly, the loudspeaker horn on the pole deformed. The announcement over the loudspeaker was distorted. A deep mechanical growl filled the hall. A huge metallic mouth with sharp teeth gaped on the ceiling. Black, oily liquid dripped from it. The speaker mouth whispered,
Last train arriving at the station.
Peppa pressed into her seat. Her parents did not notice. Suitcases at the passengers' feet moved on their own. Locks glowed red. Thin black tentacles emerged from the gaps, wrapping around people's legs. The family stepped onto the platform. Evening wind. Shadows of people on the asphalt stopped matching their owners. They stretched out, became thinner, and gained tentacles and hooks. The shadow tentacles reached toward rear legs, wrapping around ankles. People froze in place. A train approached. Its windows were a solid, impenetrable blackness. No reflections, no light inside. The doors opened. From the darkness of the carriages came the same mechanical whisper.
Train is waiting.
The shadow tentacles suddenly jerked. Several passengers were dragged toward the open doors. They screamed as they were pulled into the darkness. The door slammed shut. The train left, and the platform emptied except for Peppa's family standing at the edge. The speaker mouth on the pole was wheezing. Its metal jaws clamped shut and then opened again.
Next.
On the rails below, pools of oily liquid darkened and pulsed, taking on distorted faces of missing passengers. Silent screams frozen in time. Shadows on the platform stirred again, reaching for Peppa's family's legs. Cold tentacles wrapped around their shoes. Black drops from the speaker dripped onto Peppa's shoulder, leaving gray stains on her pink skin. From a distant tunnel, two red lights appeared. Headlights of a new train approaching silently, its windows as black as before. Impenetrable darkness. Peppa couldn't move, just like everyone else. Only her eyes reflected the red headlights of the approaching train. Peppa and George splashed in a sunny pool when George suddenly froze, pointed trembling finger downward, and started crying as several dark, blurry figures moved smoothly underwater past stairs and through its bottom. The water around them turned icy and viscous like thick syrup. The figures sped up, surrounding George, whose frightened scream abruptly stopped into muffled bubbling sounds. The bubbles turned black as Peppa desperately climbed out onto the edge. Peppa stood trembling as water dripped onto warm tiles below her feet. She looked down at her reflection in wet tile, her face still beneath water pressed against surface with black eye sockets staring upward, mouth twisted in silent scream. She recoiled and ran to change room. The floor was wet, mirrors fogged up thickly, drops fell from ceiling, creating puddles reflecting dim light. Dark shadows flickered within them. Outside door was covered with shiny black film. Peppa hurriedly wiped mirror to see her reflection calmly standing there, not mimicking movements, but smiling broadly with black holes instead of eyes. Peppa burst into shower stall, slammed door shut, turned tap sharply. The shower head poured thick black liquid that dripped onto her leg, burning coldly through skin. Liquid flowed down, forming a cold tentacle wrapping around her ankle. Behind foggy glass, silhouettes reached out with hands pressed against outside surface. Peppa leaned back against cold tiles. The tentacle tightened further, causing numbness to creep upward along her leg. The silhouettes outside began emerging through water reflection. Instead of Peppa's face, a mask with hollow black eye sockets and a grotesque frozen smile stared back at her. Suddenly, tiny black points appeared at corners of Peppa's eyes. They floated toward pupils. One finger twitched involuntarily, a sign of unnatural movement, as monsters surrounded her silently inside, but no sound came from within.
You're missing from my collection.
Evening. Peppa and Susie were sitting on the rug, watching videos on a tablet. An advertisement for Labubu toys appeared. One toy with crimson eyes and a wide smile frozen on the screen. Its head suddenly jerked. It stared directly into the camera. The next morning, Peppa found a plain gray box without any labels on the doorstep. Inside was the very figurine. Plastic, cold to the touch. Peppa placed it on a shelf. She was distracted for a second. When she turned around, the shelf was empty. The figurine was standing on a chair. Its smile seemed wider. Black, tar-like drops were dripping from the corners of its mouth. Peppa went to visit Susie. Her room smelled of paint and dust. Susie was excited about her own Labubu toy. On all the walls, Peppa noticed identical smiling faces. In the corner, jars with spiders stood. Susie disappeared. Peppa walked down the corridor, which seemed longer. A sticky black trail stretched from under the basement door. Tiny figurines lay along it. Their crimson eyes flickered in the semi-darkness. They vibrated, emitting a faint screech. Peppa descended into the basement. The cold air smelled of old paint. Susie sat in the middle of the floor. Around her, dozens, hundreds of identical figurines, all looking at Peppa with crimson points for eyes. Susie slowly turned around. Her eyes burned bright red. Her mouth was stretched into a horrible, unnatural smile.
You're missing from my collection.
The figurines around moved slightly, crawling toward each other, sticking together to form a large, fluid creature, the Gatherer. One huge eye stared at Peppa intently. Peppa backed away, pressing her back against a closed door. The Gatherer approached. Its coldness froze her breath. The skin on Peppa's arm tingled. It became smooth and shiny like plastic. In the giant pupil of the Gatherer's eye reflected her figure, surrounded by hundreds of smiling faces. The family entered a dusty antique shop. The shelves were lined with strange mechanical toys and dolls with porcelain faces. George's gaze was drawn to a glass display case in the corner. Behind the glass sat an old vintage Labubu toy made of paper mache, its paint cracked and peeling. The shop owner took out a key and opened the case. He handed the toy to George with the words, "She's been waiting just for you." One of its glass eyes was cracked. From the fissure, a small black moth slowly crawled out and landed on George's finger. As soon as George took hold of the Labubu, all the mechanical toys in the shop simultaneously turned their heads toward him. Their Their eyes gleamed in the dim light. From the floor vent of the shop, a thick fog began to pour out, smelling of dust and old books. The fog thickened, taking the shapes of fantastical beings with oversized heads and smiles that resembled Labubus. The family left the shop and called an elevator in a nearby abandoned office building. The elevator doors screeched open. Inside, the cabin was lined with worn velvet. The panel buttons had been replaced with small carved Labubu figurines of different colors. The elevator descended, but instead of the usual sound, a distorted children's melody played. George clutched the vintage Labubu tightly. Suddenly, the light in the elevator went out. When it flickered back on, a translucent figure of a girl was standing in the corner, holding a worn Labubu toy of her own. The girl's figure pointed to the control panel. One of the figurine buttons, a blood-red Labubu, glowed with an unnatural light. The elevator jerked to a stop. The doors opened into absolute darkness. From the void, thin tendrils of compressed dust reached inside. The Labubu in George's hands began to vibrate. From its cracked eyes spilled black dust, which swirled in the air, forming intricate patterns. The family stepped out of the elevator into a vast underground chamber. It was a labyrinth of glass display cases, but instead of exhibits, thousands of Labubu figurines stood inside. Every figurine in the cases turned their heads toward the family. Their eyes glowed with a soft light, illuminating the path deeper into the labyrinth. At the labyrinth's center stood an installation, a giant nest woven from old newspapers, photographs, and threads, where a fabric Labubu sat. Its mouth had been crudely sewn shut with thick stitches, but one by one the threads began to snap, revealing sharp teeth made of yellowed buttons. George approached the nest. The vintage toy in his hands reached out toward the larger Labubu. From all the cases, faint whispers in forgotten languages began to rise. The family froze inside the glass displays, transformed into perfect porcelain figurines with wide, astonished eyes. George sat at the heart of the nest, clutching his Labubu, as his skin slowly took on the texture of papier-mâché. The great Labubu smiled, its button teeth glinting in the glow of the displays. The elevator was gone, leaving only a wall covered in carved figurines.